Hey, hello everybody. My name is Regan Kirk. I'm very excited to be participating in this course. And I'm here to speak to you today about Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. So who was Mr. Erikson? Well, he lived from 1902 to 1994 and was a psychologist / psychoanalyst, although technically he never had any kind of psychology degree. He was heavily influenced by the theories of Sigmund Freud. He was acquainted with Freud and actually was a patient of Freud's daughter, Anna Freud, at one point in time. Sigmund Freud, of course, famous for his psychosexual theories of development, so he was pretty much obsessed with how sex indicates or affects people's growth from a very early age through childhood. I taught a psychology class last year where the kids just went gaga over the Oedipus complex and things like that, so he's, of course, very interesting. Erikson, on the other hand, he did not focus only on childhood. He was interested in how people develop across their entire lives. And instead of being psychosexual in the development that he looked at psychosocial development. So how is it that our social behaviors affect our development over the course of our lives? In addition to his psychosocial theory, for which he's very famous, he also developed the idea of the identity crisis. So that's probably something that a lot of us can relate to. Erikson was raised by his mother and by a man he believed to be his father. He didn't learn until pretty late in life that the man who raised him was not, in fact, his biological father, and he attributed this discovery to his feelings that he had never really known who he was throughout his life, which led to a lot of these discoveries and developments that he studied. He moved from Germany to the United States in 1933, at which point he went to teach at Harvard Medical School, despite the fact that he had no actual background or actual degree in the subject he was teaching. He wrote a number of books, and one, in fact, would go on to win the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. So that's just a little bit of background to help us understand kind of where this guy was coming from. He lived a long time, he had a lot of influence, and his theories are still incredibly well respected and widely studied today. So what is psychosocial theory? Well, as we said, it looks at how a person's personality develops over their entire lifetime. He was concerned with how social interactions help a person develop. So how do we gain a personality based on how we interact with other people? Each stage, and there are 8, addresses a conflict that Erikson believed a person would face in their life. That's something that I'm going to sort of ask you about as we go, is whether, do we really think that these stages are discrete, meaning one ends and then another begins, or do they kind of all continue and meld together over the course of our lives? Under his theory, at each stage, a person should develop a specific competence that would then serve to help them through the rest of their life. So the 8 stages as an overview, all right? This goes from beginning of life to end of life. So we've got trust versus mistrust, autonomy, meaning acting in our own way, our own fashion, versus shame and doubt, initiative versus guilt. You'll notice there's a little bit of overlap in some of these terms, right? Initiative and autonomy, not that, are kind of closely related. Industry versus inferiority, identity versus role confusion, intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation. I'm not so sure about that term, generativity, but I think we can all understand what it means. And ego integrity versus despair. All right, I know, these are a lot of terms that are kind of tossed out there. A lot of them are antonyms of each other, but these are sort of the crises that he believed everybody faces over the course of their lives, and how we deal with those crises affects how we develop as people. So the first stage is trust versus mistrust. All right, this stage is believed to occur in the first year of a person's life. He called it the most fundamental stage. It was affected largely and mostly by how a person's caregivers treated them. All right, if a person was taken care of, if they were loved, if they were provided everything they needed, they would succeed at this stage. They would develop the trust that they needed. Okay, and you'll see on my slides, I kind of at the end of most of the slides put the 2 different sides and what he said the effect would be on the person as they went through life. So if the person succeeded in the trust end of things, he said, Erikson believed, the child would feel safe and secure as they aged. On the other hand, mistrust, right, if they did not develop this trust because the caregivers did not provide the child with what they needed, the child would experience fear and uncertainty with the world as they aged. So a lot of these are kind of clear from the name, but I just wanted to make sure we understood the long-term effects of the decisions that were made. You're also going to note as we go, I have reflection questions at the bottom of each slide. So these are sort of questions just to get you thinking. If you're taking notes, maybe jot down a couple thoughts so that when we have a discussion at the end, these will all kind of tie back together. So as a teacher, I wonder, do you have students in your class who demonstrate mistrust? I know I do. I teach at a Title I school, I teach high school, I got a lot of kids who don't trust authority, don't get what they need at home. A lot of them have bounced around from home to home. So how do you address that mistrust, right? This is one of the things I mentioned that I'm going to keep kind of questioning is Erikson says this stage is over, right, at the end of your first year of life. Well, do you agree? Do you think that nobody can develop trust after this point? Or are we just kind of washing our hands of them at that point and saying, well, they'll never trust? I don't know. That seems a little too definite to me, so I'm not quite on board with that idea. Stage 2. So this is what he called early childhood. We're going to think like ages 1 to 5, 1 to 6. This is the point at which kids begin to gain independence, right? They can walk now, they're no longer being carried around. So autonomy, kids can demonstrate with things like toilet training, beginning to point out which food they want to eat and what food they don't want to eat. So the ability to make their own decisions. Erikson felt that kids who demonstrate autonomy are going to be more confident as they age. If they don't have that, they instead are kind of conflicted with feelings of shame and doubt. Those feelings are going to continue as they grow, and it's going to lead to kind of feelings of inadequacy as well. So another question for you is, are some of your students more autonomous than others, right? Are some of them perfectly fine working independently, making their own decisions, whereas others require hand-holding every step of the way? And again, I would say certainly I have students like that. And then of course, how do we address the feelings of inadequacy that students might have? Stage 3, initiative versus guilt. All right, this is when the child, I skipped a stage last one. So last stage, was actually earlier. This is the preschool stage, so maybe ages like 3 to 5. So that last one was maybe ages 2 to 3. All right, so here we're looking preschool age. This is when students begin to take control of social activities like playing games with other people. They develop some leadership skills even at this early age. So the people who take initiative, those are the leaders. Those are the ones who are going to grow up to feel capable and like they know what they're doing, versus, again, we have this self-doubt on the other side, right? So a lot of these are going to come down to kind of confidence versus feelings of inadequacy. So I ask you, do all children possess leadership capabilities? I have some students who, no matter how much you push them, they refuse to take control of anything. So how do we address that, right? Do we just say, well, they should have developed it in preschool, not much we can do? Or do we take some kind of responsibility and try to push them to develop these skills at a later date? All right, industry or competence versus inferiority. This is between roughly ages 5 and 11. And kind of like Piaget's theories and Freud's theories, right, which we'll talk about development, I personally think we have to give a lot of wiggle room to these ages, right? People develop at different speeds. And I don't think it's that saying we can't paint everyone with the same brush. We're all used to doing accommodations and things like that. So we're going to get some people who develop these different skills at different paces, and that's another challenge, right? Is the ones who have not yet come to these crises or maybe dealt with these issues, surrounded by people who have, it affects how we interact with people. So anyway, this is the stage where children start being proud of their accomplishments. Okay, they've done something, they're proud of it, they have that competence, that industry versus a sense of inferiority. One of the big factors in kids developing this sense is, of course, their behavior with the behavior of adults and caregivers around them, right? If every time you get a personal best, there's somebody cheering you on and applauding, you're going to have a very different reaction and experience and development than if you just take home a ribbon and nobody cares. So industry, kind of as a matter of course, the idea is that that leads to having confidence in your own abilities later on, versus the inferiority side is that you'll lack that belief in your ability. So maybe even though you have had some successes, nobody cheered you on, you didn't ever succeed in this little challenge, and as a result, you're always going to have that deep-seated fear of inadequacy. Again, I noted, they say that this stage ends at age 11. So does that mean, as a high school teacher, I'm sure there are middle school teachers among us, that we don't have to worry about this or deal with this in any way? And of course, I don't think that's the answer. I think one of the things that I find hardest as a teacher is finding the opportunities to offer praise as much as I find opportunities to offer censure or discipline, right? Which I'm aware of as a failing that I have. It's a struggle in my classrooms where classroom management is a real issue, and so the kids who are doing well, I really have to make an effort to find time to, really encourage them, but also the kids who misbehave, finding the right time to offer them encouragement as well to try to get the behavior to improve is an ongoing process for me. So identity versus role confusion, and you see we have our confused panda. I think it's a panda. There's some role confusion there. So this is the stage that occurs when a child is a teenager. They're figuring out who they are. So this is the time they're developing their own personal identity. Erikson considered success at this stage as leading a person to be able to conform to society's expectations. There's something about the wording of that bothers me. I'm concerned, and you can, I think, probably see that in the question. So I asked whether you have students who seem confused as to their own identity. I know everyone goes through these sort of crises, development and things, but I have at least one student who is who's really grappling with identity confusion. And I think in this day and age, when there's a lot of stuff as far as gender identity and things like that, this is a more complicated concept than it used to be. So I asked whether you agree that conforming to society's expectations is really our goal for our students. And the answer might be yes. I'm concerned with, whether with people who are trying to force themselves to fit that mold, and I have, again, a couple who are doing that right now. So is that really the goal we want to set for them, or do we want to find some way to sort of get a happy middle ground, or do we even want to say, maybe your goal is going to be to change society's expectations to fit who you want to be. So I just am concerned at this idea of trying to make ourselves fit a particular role. So I'm not totally on board with Erikson's theories here. All right, so then we're now into early adulthood. We're nearing the end, 3 stages to go. So intimacy versus isolation. So this is probably no longer applicable to our students. Or, well, I don't know, maybe it is applicable for you, right? I have a 17-year-old 9th grader, so there are certainly people who are entering young adulthood who are still in high school. But this is the stage when the goal is to develop close relationships with people. And I know as a teacher, I often don't want my students developing particularly close relationships with each other, either of a romantic nature, because it's hard to keep track of what's going on with them, or even just of a friendship nature where they're, when that mostly comes out in them not doing their work in class. So of course it's important for them to have that support network, but I know personally, I prefer for them to focus on other things with the expectation that those really close relationships will probably come later. But anyway, so during this stage, you're trying to develop close relationships with people. Erikson felt that those who developed relationships early on would go on to form enduring relationships later, versus those who were isolated during young adulthood would probably be more likely to feel loneliness and isolation and struggle with enduring relationships as an adult. So my question was, do you think that we're talking only romantic relationships, or is this referring to any kind of close relationship? And how do you think he would distinguish between the two, if in any way? Okay, so real adulthood now. Now we're talking about actual grown-ups, probably like you and me. Generativity versus stagnation. So success at this stage involves active engagement in the world or the community at large. So it's not enough to just be having your own accomplishments. You need to actually be participating in the world around you, according to Erikson. Of course, I am an introvert. I imagine there are other introverts among us. That's really more of a challenge, I would suggest, for introverts than extroverts. However, we're also all teachers, so there's a question of, are we already doing this merely by the profession that we've chosen? So he suggested that generativity, again, I hate that word, I think he just made it up, but generativity involves having, in the long run, will involve pride in your accomplishment and having good relationships, versus stagnation, right? The name pretty much suggests you're stagnant, you're not producing what you need to produce, you don't have strong relationships or accomplishments in which you can take pride. So I wanted you, now that we're not talking about our students anymore, we're talking more about our own experiences, because our students are not at this stage of life, I assume. The question is, how do you feel you're performing at this stage? Are you stagnating? Are you contributing to a larger community? You know, how should we adapt our lives if we don't feel like we've met the requirements that are present here to make sure that we can have long, happy lives? Finally, integrity versus despair. This is the stage that occurs during old age. At this point, I don't have an emoji for you. At this stage, a person is reflecting on their life, right? So the goal is, if you're successful, you'll have few at this stage, you'll have few regrets. If you are unsuccessful, you'll feel as if you've wasted your life, according to Erikson. Hopefully none among us will feel that way. I would probably suggest that there's some kind of middle ground. Hopefully these are not all just black and white. So the question is, how do we seek to maximize our feelings of integrity, maximize our feelings that we've made good choices and have good lives? So this is just a quick graphic to kind of remind us of the ages and the stages. So that 0 to 1 age, right, is trust versus mistrust. Early childhood, we move on to autonomy versus shame and doubt. Preschool, we've got initiative versus guilt. Ages 5 to 11, industry versus inferiority, right? Good luck, you middle school teachers. Although I guess middle school also covers teenage years, which is identity and role confusion. Then we've got young adulthood, we've got intimacy versus isolation. We reach adulthood, like you and me, we've got generativity versus stagnation. And finally, old age, integrity versus despair. All right, so for a discussion, in addition to the questions we've had before, I'm curious, why do you think it's important for a teacher to be familiar with these stages of psychosocial development? Is it important? How does it inform our teaching? So how does knowledge of the stages inform our understanding of our children? Then, can we use these stages somehow to inform and motivate our students? Maybe to get them thinking that they want to succeed at these different stages and looking for ways to do so in order to live happier lives. What are some methods that you can think of to address these stages in the classroom? Finally, how do we reach out to students who have failed at one of these stages or been failed by others at one of these stages? Because remember, a lot of them are tied into the behavior of caregivers. So even though Erikson, considered it the child failing at a stage, in reality, they've been failed by other people. So how do we reach out to students who have not succeeded at these stages early on? Can we remediate at a later age? I hope this was interesting for you. I hope it raised some interesting questions for discussion. I think I went a little bit over time. I look forward to hearing your responses. Thank you.